A lot of SLPs have asked me, why isn't there some kind of standard protocol that SLPs can use for language therapy? So I wanted to take just a couple minutes today to explain why that's the case and why this is such a common area where SLPs need some clarity.
Usually, when I ask SLPs what would help them feel more confident, a lot of times they say that they wish there was a standard curriculum they could use for language therapy. When I was first practicing as an SLP, I wished for something like this. I was jumping around from skill to skill, never feeling like I was making consistent progress with my students. Materials I'd purchased were collecting dust on my shelves, and I spent way more time than I'd like to admit searching the internet and putting together craft activities that totally bombed and ended up distracting my students. In short, I was putting in a lot of effort but never seeing the fruits of my labor. It made me doubt myself as a therapist and wonder if I was really making a difference. I felt like a fraud because I had assumed that by the time I was out in the field, I'd know what I was doing, but I didn't feel that way at all. That's why when I went back and got my doctorate in special education, I decided to specialize in language and literacy. And during that time, I searched for some sort of a curriculum for language therapy, or at least some standard protocol that would feel comprehensive enough for my caseload, but I never found one. That's why I decided to create my own system for language therapy during my doctoral work. And this process is what helped me go from hating language therapy to actually looking forward to my sessions. And it's also what helped me finally get respect for my colleagues and walk into IEP meetings confident and excited to share my progress updates. Now, I'm going to outline that framework for you today, but first I need to answer a couple looming questions. Mainly, why was a system like this so hard to find in the first place? Well, it comes down to a couple key reasons that I'll break down one at a time. Reason number one, confusion about school age language developmental milestones. Reason number two, treating the symptom and not the cause. And reason number three, a general lack of clarity about the SLP's role, especially when it comes to language and literacy. Let's start with that first reason, confusion about school age language developmental milestones. If you've ever done a search for developmental milestones for language, you'll likely find lots of great infographics and handouts that explain early language development. But the problem is that most of them stop around age 6. For most of us trying to make sense of what to do with school age kids, that presents a problem. Mainly that it's hard to diagnose and treat something if you don't know what normal or typical development looks like. So, why aren't there any school age language milestones charts? Well, mostly because neatly defined school age language milestones don't exist, at least not in the way that you'd expect. Lobin summed it up with this quote from his seminal study when he said, "Drawing up a valid chart of sequence and stages is hazardous. At any one age, children vary tremendously in language ability." And the reason this is the case is that language growth across the school age years isn't linear. Most of them don't increase in a neat upward linear progression. The other thing to remember is that language skills, like vocabulary, are highly dependent on the environment. So that's why instead of asking the question, what words and language skills are age appropriate for this grade level, we should be asking, what words are kids being exposed to at each grade level? And of course, the answer is going to vary for each kid, which is why we can't put things in a neat little curriculum box or a neat little chart that describes exactly what language skills kids should have at each age and grade level. But what we do know is that there are a certain set of skills that kids need in order to develop the high-level processing skills needed to be successful in school and in life. And that's where the framework that I developed comes in. But in order to understand that framework and how to use it, first, we have to understand how to funnel down that massive list of language skills we could be working on to a manageable amount. The next reason that a language therapy curriculum doesn't exist is that most people are focused more on treating symptoms instead of causes when it comes to language processing. I get a lot of questions about things like reading comprehension strategies, like stating the main idea, inferencing, narratives, and how to do literacy based therapy. Now, all of those things I just mentioned have value, but they are often done out of sequence. Without the foundational language skills needed to understand words and sentences, high level comprehension when reading or listening is going to suffer. If kids don't have a solid sense of vocabulary and sentence structure, they aren't likely to complete high level comprehension tasks successfully. So, things like reading a paragraph and being able to understand what they just read. This is why a lot of people often feel stuck when they're working on goals for following directions or WH questions about inferences. It's because a lot of the kids that they're working with don't have the language skills needed to focus on the big picture of what they're reading or hearing. So they don't have the language skills needed to support that high level comprehension. Struggling with comprehension is the symptom of underlying language issues at the word and sentence level. This was a big aha moment for me as an SLP because I was constantly scrambling to work on a million different language skills. And I didn't realize that there's a domino effect with certain language skills. In other words, working on word and sentence level comprehension can actually have an impact on those high level processing skills like following directions, reading a paragraph, or just being able to follow along in class. And one common mistake people make is focusing on the harder skills like comprehension and inferencing and neglecting the foundational skills like vocabulary and sentence structure. This can leave kids really frustrated. Imagine if you had a hard time with something and you went to get help, but when you got there, the person helping you just asked you over and over again to do something you didn't know how to do. Asking certain kids to do comprehension tasks can be like throwing them off the deep end without teaching them how to swim. Swimming in the deep end might be the end goal. It might make sense to practice it at some point, but not yet. Now, some people go too far in the other direction and focus on skills that aren't very functional when done out of context. An example would be things like verb tenses or categorization. All of those things have a place in language therapy, but only when addressed in the right situation. The most common scenario is that people bounce back and forth between skills that are too hard and skills that are decontextualized without any kind of system to bridge the gap in between. This results in a long laundry list of skills that SLPs feel like they have to cover, which leaves them scrambling, jumping around from skill to skill with no rhyme or reason. If you're treating school-age language disorders, you know what I mean. The truth is that there are some language skills that aren't a high priority to target. Others may be relevant to target eventually, but might not be an immediate priority. Now, if you've done any of the above, like addressed comprehension before kids are ready, or jumped around from skill to skill without any rhyme or reason, it's not your fault. I used to do the same thing due to information overload, but that can all change for you if you follow the right system. But before we can talk about that, we need to understand why the idea of a curriculum doesn't make sense for SLPs in the first place. So that brings me to the third reason, a lack of clarity about the SLP's role. Now, I get why people want something scripted and specific that they can follow. On the surface, it seems like it could make life a whole lot easier, but that might not necessarily be the case. Curriculums may work fine for teachers because it's their job to deliver the curriculum. They are experts in knowing grade level expectations. But you, as the SLP, are not a teacher. You are a therapist, and therapy is individualized. That means that one size doesn't fit all. The problem with a curriculum is that no one cookie cutter play by play is going to work for your caseload. The problem is, starting from scratch with each case can mean a lot of work for you as the SLP when you have a caseload of 40, 60, 80, 100, or some other ridiculous number of students. If you work with pediatric populations, a good portion of your caseload is likely language cases. If planning for language therapy is sucking up a lot of your time, that can get stressful very quickly. So while SLPs can't have a curriculum, we can develop something else that is just right, a middle ground, something that's flexible enough that it meets your students' unique needs, but structured enough that you're not starting from scratch each time you get a new language therapy referral. The system that I've created does just that.
Now, if you found this video helpful so far and you want to learn how to apply the entire Essential 5 framework for language therapy to your practice, then I invite you to check out my entire presentation where I outline the research behind this system, why it works, and the key components that you need in order to start creating your system. So on this presentation, I'm going to cover the one area that you need to focus on that really forms the basis for your framework, as well as those components that fit under it that are going to inform what strategies that you use in your treatment. And then I'll also talk about some common mistakes that SLPs make when planning language therapy and how you can avoid making them. So it's going to be possible for you to get better results by focusing on fewer things that give you the biggest bang for your buck in therapy and help you to create consistent change in your students' performance without requiring hours of prep and planning on your part. So all you need to do to check out that presentation is go to drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. Again, that's drkarenspeech.com/language therapy to check out that free online presentation.